Jack spent most of his 20s moving from one exhausting job to another. He carried boxes at a warehouse, delivered packages during heavy rain, and repaired damaged furniture in small neighborhoods that people rarely noticed. Every night, he returned home with sore muscles and the constant feeling that life was moving faster than his ability to catch up. While many people around him accepted ordinary routines, Jack secretly believed he could build something larger with his own hands. That opportunity appeared when he met Carney, an older man who had just retired after decades of factory work. Carney used his pension money carefully and dreamed about opening a small building materials shop. Jack admired Carney's discipline and patience. Together, they rented a narrow roadside store, painted the walls themselves, arranged cheap wooden shelves, and began serving customers with simple hopes and honest effort. The small shop attracted attention because Jack and Carney treated customers differently from larger stores nearby. They carried cement bags directly into customers' vehicles, delivered wood to construction sites late at night, and allowed trusted workers to pay gradually when money became difficult. Carney managed the finances with extreme caution, recording every transaction neatly inside thick notebooks that he protected like treasure. Jack handled suppliers and transportation, traveling across towns to negotiate better prices for nails, pipes, and roofing materials. Their days started before sunrise and often ended long after nearby businesses closed. Despite the exhaustion, the two men felt proud every time returning customers recommended the shop to friends or relatives. Carney often smiled quietly while observing the crowded store during weekends. Jack saw the business not only as a source of income but also as proof that persistence could slowly change a person's life, even after years of hardship. After 2 years, the store expanded into a larger warehouse beside a busy road filled with trucks and construction workers. Jack and Carney hired several young employees from nearby villages who needed work to support their families. The business slowly became known for reliability rather than luxury. Carney remained humble despite the growing income. He still wore old shirts, carried packed meals from home, and reminded employees to avoid waste. Jack, however, began developing larger ambitions. He studied successful business owners who operated multiple warehouses across the province. He imagined bigger offices, larger distribution routes, and trucks carrying his company logo across distant cities. Even so, he respected Carney deeply during those early years. Their partnership felt strong because both men believed they were building something meaningful together. Customers trusted them, employees respected them, and neighbors admired how two ordinary men transformed hard work into stability. At that point, Jack still believed honest effort alone would be enough. The business eventually generated profits beyond anything Jack had imagined during his difficult younger years. He purchased a comfortable house with a wide front yard where his children could play safely after school. For the first time in his life, he no longer worried about unpaid electricity bills or empty kitchen cabinets near the end of each month. He enjoyed simple pleasures that once seemed impossible, including family vacations, expensive meals, and weekends without physical exhaustion. Carney also benefited from the company's success, though he remained modest and careful with spending. Jack often drove through the city at night, observing bright restaurants and crowded shopping centers while feeling proud that he could finally afford such comforts. The stress that once controlled his life appeared to disappear slowly. He believed he had escaped poverty permanently. Friends praised his determination, relatives admired his achievements, and his children proudly told classmates about their father's successful business. As the company grew larger, Jack experienced the satisfaction that came from being recognized everywhere he went. Suppliers greeted him warmly, local officials invited him to business gatherings, and former co-workers who once ignored him now treated him with admiration. His family enjoyed a lifestyle far more comfortable than anything they had experienced before. Jack bought better furniture, newer vehicles, and expensive gifts for celebrations. He no longer counted every coin before making purchases. The freedom felt addictive because it erased years of insecurity and embarrassment from his memory. At home, evenings became quieter and easier. Bills were paid early, food filled the dining table, and his children attended better schools. Jack convinced himself that he had finally reached a level where life would remain stable forever. He slept peacefully knowing his efforts had transformed his family's future. During those moments, wealth seemed like the final answer to every hardship he had once endured. For several months, Jack genuinely believed he had enough. He spent mornings visiting the warehouse without pressure and afternoons resting with his family. The business still operated successfully because loyal employees managed daily operations responsibly. Carney remained involved, though he preferred staying behind the scenes instead of enjoying public attention. Jack sometimes remembered his difficult early years and felt grateful for how dramatically life had changed. He donated small amounts to neighborhood events and occasionally helped struggling relatives with financial support. Many people viewed him as proof that patience and determination could reward ordinary workers. Yet beneath the comfort, something subtle began changing inside him. He noticed competitors expanding faster and purchasing larger properties. He heard stories about businessmen who became extraordinarily wealthy within only a few years. Those stories planted quiet dissatisfaction inside his mind. Even though he already possessed stability, he slowly started measuring his success against people who had even more. Jack's wife, Iri, viewed their success differently. While Jack occasionally felt grateful for the stability they achieved, Iri focused constantly on what other wealthy families possessed. She spent increasing amounts of time comparing houses, jewelry, vacations, and social status. During gatherings, she carefully observed the clothes worn by successful business owners and the luxury vehicles parked outside expensive restaurants. One person especially disturbed her thoughts, Carney. Although Carney lived modestly, his financial position remained strong because he still owned a large share of the business. Iri quietly resented the fact that Carney's wealth continued growing despite his simple lifestyle. She believed Jack worked harder and deserved greater control over the company. Slowly, she began influencing conversations at home by questioning why Carney still benefited so heavily from profits. Her dissatisfaction spread through the household like smoke, subtle at first but impossible to ignore after enough time passed. Iri's frustration deepened whenever she attended social events where wealthy families displayed their lifestyles openly. She returned home carrying feelings of jealousy that grew stronger every month. She criticized the size of their home, the simplicity of their vacations, and the limits of their spending compared to richer business owners. Most importantly, she repeatedly reminded Jack that Carney continued earning large profits despite contributing less physical labor than before. Iri described Carney as lucky rather than hardworking. She argued that Jack managed suppliers, employees, and expansion while Carney merely enjoyed the results of earlier investments. Over time, her words slowly changed Jack's perspective. He began noticing how much money flowed toward Carney's accounts each quarter. The partnership that once symbolized trust started feeling unequal in Jack's eyes. Although he still respected Carney, envy quietly entered his thoughts. Iri recognized this change immediately and continued pushing those feelings further. Iri eventually involved their children in conversations about wealth and status. During dinners, she encouraged them to discuss the lifestyles of richer classmates whose parents owned luxury businesses. The children slowly adopted her mindset and began viewing their own comfortable life as insufficient. They asked why other families traveled abroad more frequently or owned larger homes with private security. Instead of correcting those attitudes, Iri encouraged them carefully. She described the business as something Jack had built through sacrifice, while Carney continued receiving large rewards without equal effort. The children gradually repeated these complaints around Jack. Hearing similar opinions from his entire family affected him deeply. He wanted to provide the best future possible for them and feared appearing weak or unsuccessful compared to wealthier businessmen. The peaceful satisfaction he once enjoyed disappeared completely. Home no longer felt like a place of gratitude. Instead, it became a constant reminder that others possessed more. The pressure inside Jack's household intensified until nearly every conversation revolved around money and expansion. IRI spoke constantly about opportunities that richer businessmen used to multiply profits quickly. Their children admired aggressive entrepreneurs who displayed power openly and treated wealth as proof of superiority. Jack initially resisted some of these conversations because he still valued loyalty toward Carney. However, repeated criticism slowly weakened his principles. He began reviewing company documents privately and calculating how much additional profit he could gain if he controlled the entire business alone. At the same time, IRI encouraged him to think strategically rather than emotionally. She described business as a world where only ambitious people survived. Jack spent restless nights imagining larger warehouses, bigger projects, and faster expansion without Carney's influence limiting decisions. Eventually, temptation became stronger than gratitude. The partnership that once represented friendship and trust quietly transformed into an obstacle standing between Jack and greater wealth. Jack started changing small details inside the company records without attracting attention. He delayed reporting several profitable transactions and quietly redirected payments through personal accounts that only he controlled. Because Carney trusted him completely after years of working together, he rarely questioned the financial documents placed in front of him. Jack used that trust carefully. He presented confusing reports filled with technical language and unnecessary details that made it difficult for Carney to notice missing money. At first, Jack felt nervous whenever he manipulated numbers, but those feelings slowly faded after realizing nobody suspected him. At home, IRI praised every extra profit entering their accounts and encouraged him to continue. She described the situation as a reward for all the sacrifices Jack had made over the years. Little by little, Jack stopped viewing his actions as betrayal. Instead, he convinced himself that he simply deserved a larger portion of the company they built together. The deception became more serious when Jack proposed a major business expansion that supposedly required complicated legal paperwork and new financing agreements. Carney trusted Jack's judgment because he believed Jack understood modern business better than he did. Without carefully reviewing every document, Carney signed papers that transferred ownership of warehouses, vehicles, and land into Jack's personal control. Jack arranged meetings late at night after long workdays, knowing Carney would feel exhausted and eager to finish quickly. Each signature slowly removed Carney's power inside the company. Meanwhile, Jack secretly consulted lawyers willing to help manipulate contracts for large payments. Every successful step increased his confidence. Although brief moments of guilt appeared whenever he saw Carney working honestly beside him, those feelings disappeared whenever Jack imagined the larger empire he could soon control alone. IRI celebrated the progress privately and treated Jack like a man finally brave enough to seize complete power. The final betrayal arrived during a tense business meeting attended by accountants, investors, and several legal representatives connected to Jack. Using manipulated financial reports, Jack accused Carney of making poor financial decisions that supposedly endangered the company's future. Carney sat silently in shock while false evidence was presented against him. He struggled to understand how the business they built together had suddenly turned against him. Because most legal ownership had already been transferred secretly, Carney possessed little ability to defend himself. Within weeks, banks froze his access to company funds, and lawyers informed him that he no longer held meaningful control over the business. Years of hard work disappeared almost overnight. Employees watched quietly from a distance, afraid of losing their jobs if they defended Carney openly. Jack officially became the sole owner of the expanding company. Outwardly, he appeared victorious and respected, but deep inside, he carried the heavy knowledge that his success now rested entirely on betrayal. After Carney disappeared from the company, an uncomfortable silence filled Jack's daily life. The warehouse no longer felt warm or familiar without the older man calmly organizing supplies and greeting workers each morning. Jack occasionally remembered the early years when both of them unloaded trucks together under the hot sun and struggled simply to keep the business alive. Rumors eventually spread that Carney had moved into a small rented room after losing nearly all his savings. Some former employees quietly blamed Jack for what happened, though nobody dared confront him directly. During sleepless nights, Jack stared at the ceiling while remembering Carney's trust and loyalty throughout the years. For brief moments, guilt felt unbearable. Yet every time those emotions appeared, Jack distracted himself with plans for expansion, luxury purchases, or discussions about future profits. He feared that honestly facing his actions would destroy the powerful image he had worked so hard to create. Rather than admitting wrongdoing, Jack slowly began creating explanations that made his actions feel reasonable inside his own mind. He convinced himself that Carney had become too old and too weak to manage a growing company. He argued internally that business required aggressive decisions and that emotional loyalty only prevented success. IRI constantly strengthened those thoughts by praising Jack as a smart and courageous businessman. She described Carney as someone who failed because he lacked ambition. Over time, Jack repeated these justifications so often that they slowly replaced the guilt he once felt. He stopped seeing Carney as a victim and instead viewed him as a man unable to survive in a competitive world. This shift changed Jack deeply. Once he successfully ignored his conscience, moral boundaries became much easier to cross. Wealth no longer represented comfort or security alone. It became proof that he possessed power over people who were weaker or less ambitious than him. With complete control over the company, Jack pushed expansion harder than ever before. He purchased additional warehouses, entered risky distribution markets, and forced employees to work under growing pressure. The honest values that once shaped the business slowly disappeared. Jack cared only about growth and profits. Whenever income slowed slightly, frustration consumed him immediately. The peaceful satisfaction he once enjoyed during simpler years vanished completely. IRI admired this transformation because it brought larger houses, expensive parties, and greater social influence. Jack also changed socially. He spent increasing amounts of time with wealthy businessmen known for bribery, tax manipulation, and corrupt deals with government officials. Instead of feeling disturbed by such behavior, Jack became fascinated by how quickly illegal methods produced results. He started believing that honest people remained poor because they followed rules too carefully. Little by little, greed replaced every remaining part of the hard-working young man he once used to be. Jack soon discovered that legal business expansion required patience, taxes, permits, and endless government regulations that slowed profits significantly. Rather than accepting those limitations, he searched for faster ways to increase wealth. Through wealthy connections, he learned about illegal markets involving counterfeit construction materials, untaxed imports, and hidden distribution networks. At first, he approached these opportunities cautiously because he understood the risks involved. However, the profits shocked him. One successful illegal shipment generated more money than several months of honest business operations combined. Jack convinced himself that many successful businessmen secretly operated the same way while pretending publicly to respect the law. He invested carefully into small illegal transactions and felt relieved every time authorities failed to notice. Over time, fear transformed into excitement. The danger itself became addictive because it made ordinary business feel slow, weak, and completely unimportant compared to the enormous profits now available. As profits from illegal activities increased, Jack's personality changed dramatically. He became colder toward employees, harsher during negotiations, and completely indifferent toward the suffering caused by his decisions. Workers who complained about unpaid overtime or dangerous conditions were quickly removed and replaced. Small competitors who resisted Jack's growing influence suddenly faced mysterious inspections, supply shortages, or financial problems connected to people working for Jack behind the scenes. He enjoyed the feeling of control that money and intimidation provided. At home, his family celebrated every financial success without questioning where the money came from. Expensive renovations transformed their house into a symbol of status that impressed everyone who visited. Jack noticed something important during those years: society respected visible wealth more than honesty. Powerful people welcomed him into exclusive gatherings because his money benefited them. Each successful illegal deal strengthened his belief that morality existed only for ordinary people without wealth or influence. Jack's illegal operations expanded carefully behind the appearance of legitimate business. Officially, his company still sold construction materials and managed transportation services across the city. Secretly, hidden warehouses stored counterfeit products and smuggled goods that generated enormous profits. Jack bribed inspectors to ignore suspicious shipments arriving late at night and manipulated invoices so illegal transactions appeared completely normal during audits. Trusted employees handled sensitive deliveries in exchange for large payments and promises of protection. Anyone who asked too many questions quickly disappeared from important operations. Jack no longer viewed dishonesty as temporary behavior. It became the foundation of his growing empire. He studied loopholes inside government regulations and learned how corrupt officials protected profitable criminals for the right price. Every successful operation increased his confidence further. The fear he once felt toward breaking the law disappeared almost entirely. Instead, Jack began viewing the law as something flexible that could always be negotiated through money. The most dangerous stage began when Jack entered business relationships connected to organized criminal networks. Through wealthy intermediaries, he supplied transportation and storage for illegal goods moving across regional borders. These operations introduced him to powerful figures involved in smuggling, illegal mining, and underground markets protected by violence and corruption. Jack understood that becoming involved with such people would make leaving extremely difficult, but the profits overwhelmed his caution completely. He expanded operations rapidly, using legitimate warehouses to hide illegal shipments from authorities. Corrupt officials received regular payments to guarantee protection during investigations. Jack also learned how political influence worked behind closed doors. Wealth opened opportunities that honesty never could. Government representatives who once ignored him now attended private dinners and accepted expensive gifts from him openly. With every new connection, Jack moved deeper into a hidden world where greed, corruption, and fear controlled everything far more strongly than justice ever could. Jack's influence continued spreading quietly through the city's business and political circles. He no longer depended only on construction materials or transportation services. Instead, he created multiple fake companies that existed only on paper to hide illegal income and avoid taxes. Accountants willing to break the law received expensive gifts and large payments for helping him manipulate financial reports. Jack also trapped smaller business owners in unfair agreements that slowly transferred control of their companies into his hands. Many desperate entrepreneurs accepted his offers because they needed financial support, only to discover later that they had surrendered their freedom completely. The methods resembled the betrayal he once used against Carney, but now Jack repeated them without hesitation or guilt. He believed intelligence meant taking advantage of weakness before someone else could do the same. With every successful scheme, his confidence grew stronger. Honest business now seemed slow, outdated, and completely useless in his eyes. As Jack's wealth increased, his connections with corrupt officials became deeper and more dangerous. He regularly funded local events, donated to political campaigns, and provided expensive favors for influential people. Publicly, many viewed him as a generous businessman who supported economic growth in the region. Secretly, those donations guaranteed protection whenever investigations threatened his operations. Police officers ignored suspicious shipments, inspectors approved illegal permits, and government representatives quietly warned Jack whenever problems appeared. He also strengthened relationships with criminal bosses involved in smuggling and illegal mining. Through those connections, Jack gained access to underground networks capable of moving products across borders without detection. Fear slowly became one of his most valuable tools. People who once questioned his activities now avoided speaking openly because they understood how much influence he possessed. Jack realized that power no longer came only from money. Real power came from controlling people who enforced the law itself. The enormous wealth flowing into Jack's household transformed the family's lifestyle completely. Weekends became filled with luxury vacations, expensive shopping trips, and private parties attended by wealthy businessmen and public officials. Their house expanded into a massive property with security guards, imported furniture, and luxury vehicles parked across the front yard. IRI enjoyed displaying their success publicly because admiration from others made her feel powerful and respected. Their children quickly adopted the same habits. They spent large amounts of money on designer clothing, expensive watches, and exclusive clubs where wealthy families gathered. Inside the household, nobody questioned where the money originated anymore. Instead, every new purchase became proof that Jack's risky decisions were worthwhile. The family viewed themselves as superior to ordinary people struggling with daily expenses. Wealth no longer represented comfort alone. It became a symbol of status, influence, and freedom from rules that limited everyone else around them. The family's luxurious lifestyle attracted attention from ambitious people hoping to benefit from Jack's growing influence. Politicians attended their parties, entertainers praised them publicly, and businessmen competed for invitations into their social circles. IRI enjoyed controlling relationships through expensive gifts and financial favors. She believed generosity created loyalty, even when it was motivated entirely by selfish interests. Their children became increasingly arrogant after spending time among wealthy elites who treated ordinary workers as insignificant. Expensive habits developed rapidly because unlimited spending became normal inside the household. Vacations turned more extravagant every year, celebrations became larger, and possessions lost emotional meaning because anything could easily be replaced. Jack occasionally noticed how disconnected his family had become from normal life, but instead of feeling concerned, he felt proud. He believed his success allowed them to live above ordinary limitations. Deep inside, he convinced himself that such luxury justified every illegal action that made their lifestyle possible. Over time, the family openly mocked people who struggled financially and viewed honesty as weakness rather than integrity. IRI constantly reminded the children that powerful people succeeded because they dared to ignore rules that limited others. Every new business victory became another excuse for celebration, regardless of how much suffering or corruption existed behind those profits. Luxury itself became addictive. No matter how much they possessed, satisfaction never lasted long because larger desires always followed. Expensive cars soon felt ordinary, massive houses no longer impressed them, and vacations quickly became repetitive. Jack realized that maintaining such a lifestyle required endless financial growth. The family's enormous spending habits and social expectations forced him toward even riskier operations. Instead of bringing peace, wealth trapped them inside constant hunger for more. Their happiness depended completely on continuous expansion, making greed feel less like a choice and more like a permanent part of their identity. Eventually, IRI decided that simply enjoying Jack's wealth was no longer enough. Together with their children, she wanted direct involvement in the family's most profitable operations. They entered the illegal mining business, exporting valuable minerals overseas through hidden shipping routes controlled by corrupt officials and criminal networks. The profits were enormous because taxes, environmental regulations, and legal permits were ignored completely. Entire villages suffered damaged forests and polluted rivers because of those mining activities, but the family rarely considered such consequences. IRI focused only on increasing shipment volume and expanding foreign buyers. Their children handled communication with overseas partners despite lacking serious business experience. They relied heavily on the family's reputation and wealth to gain influence quickly. Jack initially appreciated their enthusiasm because it strengthened the family empire further. However, he underestimated how dangerous illegal markets could become when controlled by people driven entirely by greed rather than caution. The illegal mining business expanded rapidly because international demand created extraordinary profits within short periods of time. IRI and the children became obsessed with increasing production as quickly as possible. Workers were forced into dangerous conditions while local communities watched forests disappear and rivers turn dark with pollution. Complaints from villagers were ignored completely because money continued flowing into the family's accounts. Unlike Jack, who entered corruption gradually over many years, the younger family members lacked patience and discipline. They believed wealth alone solved every problem. Several successful shipments convinced them that they were untouchable. Expensive celebrations followed each major transaction, strengthening their confidence even further. Meanwhile, authorities and criminal networks quietly monitored the growing operation. Jack noticed the family becoming reckless, but he remained blinded by profits and pride. Instead of slowing down, they pushed expansion harder, believing bigger risks would always produce even greater rewards in the future. As the mining operations grew larger, IRI became increasingly ambitious and demanding. She pushed the children to seek independent control over several overseas transactions rather than relying on Jack's older business partners. The family began negotiating directly with foreign buyers, hoping to keep larger profits for themselves instead of sharing money with middlemen and powerful local figures. Their greed expanded faster than their understanding of how illegal systems truly worked. Experienced smugglers and corrupt officials noticed the family becoming impatient and disrespectful toward established networks. Still, IRI ignored every warning sign because recent profits convinced her that intelligence and courage mattered more than loyalty or caution. The children adopted the same mindset. They viewed older criminal figures as obstacles standing between them and greater wealth. Jack occasionally sensed danger approaching, but years of successful corruption made him overly confident. He believed money could solve every problem before it became truly dangerous. Despite their enormous ambition, IRI and the children lacked the experience necessary to manage complicated illegal businesses safely. They understood how to spend money but knew little about maintaining dangerous relationships built on bribery, fear, and hidden agreements. Unlike Jack, who slowly learned how corruption operated through years of trial and caution, the younger family members acted emotionally and impatiently. They demanded larger profits immediately and treated long-term allies carelessly whenever payments seemed too expensive. The children especially believed their family name alone guaranteed protection from consequences. They ignored advice from older business partners who warned them about respecting criminal networks and government officials involved in illegal trade. Instead of building trust carefully, they focused only on maximizing income as quickly as possible. Their arrogance slowly created tension inside the underground networks that protected the mining operations. Many powerful people began viewing the family not as useful partners but as greedy liabilities. The family's hunger for wealth continued growing uncontrollably. IRI constantly pressured the children to increase profits and expand shipments faster, even when existing operations already generated more money than they could reasonably spend. The younger family members became obsessed with proving themselves more successful than their father's older associates. However, their lack of experience created serious problems behind the scenes. Important payments were delayed, agreements were ignored, and several shipments became disorganized because they rushed decisions without understanding the risks involved. Workers, distributors, and corrupt officials started complaining quietly about the family's behavior. Instead of responding carefully, IRI and the children dismissed those complaints arrogantly, believing everyone would remain loyal because of the enormous profits involved. Jack noticed growing instability within the business network but struggled to control his family's ambitions anymore. The same greed that once motivated expansion had now evolved into dangerous overconfidence that threatened everything they had built. Eventually, IRI and the children decided that paying large bribes and sharing profits with distributors, corrupt officials, and criminal intermediaries reduced their earnings too much. They believed the family had already become powerful enough to operate independently without constantly rewarding the people who protected their illegal business. Important payments that once guaranteed smooth operations suddenly stopped arriving. Government officers who expected monthly rewards began feeling insulted and suspicious. Several distributors responsible for moving illegal mining products overseas also complained quietly after receiving smaller payments than promised. Instead of handling those tensions carefully, IRI dismissed the complaints arrogantly and accused others of becoming greedy. The children supported her decisions because they believed the family's wealth and influence made them untouchable. Jack strongly sensed danger approaching and warned them indirectly about respecting powerful networks. However, years of success had made the family completely blind to consequences. Greed now controlled their decisions more strongly than fear or caution ever could. The situation became increasingly dangerous as unpaid officials and criminal intermediaries started turning against the family quietly behind the scenes. Information about illegal shipments, hidden warehouses, and overseas transactions slowly spread among people who once protected Jack's operations loyally. IRI still refused to restore the payments because she viewed bribery expenses as unnecessary losses rather than protection. The children shared the same reckless confidence. They believed no authority would dare challenge a family connected to powerful businessmen and politicians. Meanwhile, competitors and criminal partners who felt betrayed started cooperating secretly with investigators. Government agencies that previously ignored suspicious activities suddenly reopened old reports connected to illegal mining exports and financial fraud. Jack watched these developments anxiously while realizing the family had crossed a dangerous line. For the first time in many years, he felt genuine fear returning. The hidden system that once protected them was beginning to collapse because the family's greed had destroyed the loyalty money once purchased. One early morning, authorities finally launched coordinated raids against several warehouses, offices, and properties connected to the family's mining operations. Armed officers seized documents, computers, shipment records, and large amounts of illegal products hidden inside storage facilities. IRI and the children were arrested publicly while cameras recorded everything for national news coverage. Neighbors and employees watched in shock as luxury vehicles, expensive jewelry, and stacks of financial records were carried away as evidence. The same officials who once accepted bribes from the family now treated them like dangerous criminals. Inside the city, rumors spread rapidly about corruption, smuggling, and illegal exports connected to Jack's empire. Jack himself avoided immediate arrest because many important figures still protected him quietly, but emotionally he felt completely destroyed. Seeing his wife and children taken away shattered the confidence he had built over many years. For the first time, wealth seemed powerless against fear, shame, and uncertainty. After the arrests, Jack spent several sleepless nights alone inside his enormous house, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt meaningless and empty. News channels repeated stories about illegal mining, environmental destruction, bribery, and corruption connected to his family. Business partners stopped answering calls, politicians avoided public association with him, and several longtime employees quietly disappeared to protect themselves. Jack's children faced intense public criticism while IRI remained trapped inside a detention facility alongside criminals she once believed were beneath her social status. Jack's heart felt crushed by guilt and helplessness. He blamed himself for introducing the family into corruption, yet he also blamed IRI and the children for becoming too greedy and reckless. Memories of Carney returned constantly during those lonely nights. Jack finally understood how easily power and wealth could disappear when fear replaced loyalty. Despite all his influence, he suddenly realized that even corruption had limits when powerful people decided someone had become too dangerous. Refusing to lose his family, Jack immediately began using every connection and illegal method available to fight the arrests. He contacted powerful lawyers known for manipulating cases involving wealthy criminals and secretly delivered enormous amounts of money to officials willing to cooperate. Police investigators received expensive gifts, prosecutors were approached through intermediaries, and judges quietly received promises of financial rewards in exchange for favorable decisions. Jack reopened old relationships with political figures who still owed him favors from previous business arrangements. Every day became filled with secret meetings, hidden payments, and desperate negotiations behind closed doors. The legal system slowly transformed into another market where outcomes depended entirely on money and influence. Jack no longer cared about morality, justice, or public opinion. His only goal was freeing his family before the situation completely destroyed everything he had built. The enormous wealth accumulated through years of corruption finally became his strongest weapon against the law itself. Months later, the family slowly regained freedom through reduced charges, manipulated evidence, and mysterious legal decisions that confused the public. Several important witnesses suddenly changed their statements, critical documents disappeared, and investigators who once pursued the case aggressively became strangely silent. Iri and the children returned home emotionally exhausted but physically free. Publicly, lawyers described the outcome as proof that many accusations had been exaggerated. Privately, everyone understood that money and influence had purchased their release. Jack spent unimaginable amounts protecting the family, yet he felt relieved knowing prison had been avoided. Instead of learning from the disaster, however, the experience changed the family in a more dangerous way. They no longer feared the legal system at all. Surviving such a massive scandal convinced them that wealth truly placed them above ordinary consequences. The family viewed their release not as a warning but as evidence that power could overcome nearly any crime if enough money was involved. After escaping punishment, Jack transformed into someone far more ruthless than before. Any remaining fear inside him disappeared completely because he believed the legal system itself now belonged to people with enough money. His illegal businesses expanded rapidly into new regions involving smuggling, land theft, extortion, and underground financial operations. Small business owners who refused cooperation suddenly faced intimidation, mysterious inspections, or violent pressure from criminal groups connected to Jack's network. Poor communities lost land after being manipulated into unfair agreements that benefited Jack's companies enormously. Workers endured dangerous conditions because complaints could easily lead to threats or unemployment. Jack no longer bothered hiding his arrogance in public. He openly displayed wealth, security guards, and political connections because he enjoyed reminding others how untouchable he had become. The hard-working young man who once dreamed of honest success had completely disappeared beneath years of greed, corruption, and unchecked power. The family also changed after surviving the arrests. Iri and the children embraced corruption even more aggressively because they believed fear only limited weak people. Their businesses expanded deeper into illegal mining, international smuggling, and financial fraud across multiple regions. Entire communities suffered environmental destruction while local officials remained silent after receiving payments from Jack's organization. People who resisted were threatened economically or socially until they surrendered. Journalists investigating the family suddenly lost access to information or faced mysterious legal accusations designed to silence them. Jack enjoyed watching powerful people obey him because it proved how much influence he controlled. At family gatherings, conversations revolved around expansion plans, political alliances, and strategies for crushing competitors. Nobody discussed ethics anymore because morality had become meaningless inside their world. Wealth, intimidation, and corruption now shaped every decision they made. The family no longer merely participated in corruption. They had become part of the system itself. Over time, nearly everyone inside the city understood what Jack and his family truly were. Ordinary workers, business owners, journalists, and even local officials quietly discussed the corruption surrounding his empire. People knew about the illegal mining operations, the bribery, the intimidation, and the hidden criminal networks protecting the family's businesses. Yet almost nobody dared challenge them openly. Those who spoke too loudly suddenly faced tax investigations, business problems, legal accusations, or threats from unknown individuals connected to Jack's organization. Fear spread silently through the community. Many people hated what Jack represented, but survival felt more important than resistance. Politicians continued attending his events publicly while pretending nothing was wrong because they feared losing financial support or political influence. Jack noticed the fear surrounding his name and secretly enjoyed it. He believed true power meant controlling not only wealth and business but also the courage of everyone around him. Now the story no longer belongs only to Jack and his family. It belongs to everyone who watches corruption grow quietly while believing nothing can be changed. Jack began as an ordinary man who once worked honestly beside Carney, carrying heavy boxes and dreaming about a better future. Step by step, greed slowly replaced gratitude, until wealth became more important than conscience itself. Many people around him stayed silent because they feared losing comfort, opportunities, or safety. That silence allowed corruption to grow stronger year after year. The question left behind is not only about Jack's crimes, but about the choices ordinary people make whenever power becomes dangerous. Will society continue allowing wealthy and corrupt people to control everything through fear and money? Or will people finally risk speaking honestly even when doing so feels frightening? Every generation eventually faces that decision. The future depends on whether courage becomes stronger than fear.